Welcome to the Levy and Associates Calibration Point Podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share.
I want to welcome everybody to this month's Calibration Point Podcast, and I'm excited to have a return guest. One of our, now Sarah, you're in your 18th year with Levy and Associates. I'm super excited to have you back on, and we get to talk about your, servant leadership, organizational leadership, and cultures and leadership and everything kind of culture and leadership today. Sarah, you have a great role with us getting to build our organization up, system, structure, and then doing the same thing with clients. And as you're finishing up now your doctorate in strategic leadership, we thought it'd be a really good topic to have you come in and talk about just ethics and implications of leadership and just some of the research that you're seeing and how you're applying it. So Sarah, I want to say, one, thank you for coming back on.
Of course. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we've come up with a quirky topic for our session today, beyond good intentions, as you and I have talked about this. So I'm just going to turn this over to you, and then we can just explore what do we mean when we introduce the topic around leadership of beyond good intentions.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So beyond good intentions, I think every day we show up to work in our jobs with good intentions of, getting our stuff done, doing well, meeting expectations. And maybe consciously or unconsciously, we show up with good intentions of being a good person. But in leadership, that's just not enough. Just the idea of being a good person doesn't maybe go as far as what you would think. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is just the importance of being active in your leadership and not allowing that void to exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know you have some research you want to share, and I would just say for those listening, probably most of our leaders would say, well, I'm active in my leadership, but that's not really what we're talking about, right? Help us unpack where we're going to go.
Yeah. Okay. So the initial research done by Trevino and colleagues in the early 2000s, they interviewed executive leaders in various industries, and these were individuals who were identified by others as being ethical leaders in their organizations. And the research, what came out of it that was interesting was this idea of being a moral person or a person with good intentions. As we would think about a good leader, one who's fair and honest, has concern for others, concern for the world around them, integrity in their leadership. It's just not enough. Like, they found that being a good person didn't carry maybe the weight that they thought it would. And one reason why is to think about in bigger organizations, the executive leadership maybe isn't always seen on a day-to-day. So even though role modeling behavior is important, there can be distance between those people that you're actually, your colleagues, your peers in your organization, providing leadership to, and they're not actively seeing that. That's one reason why. But it also has to be what you're talking about and what is reinforced in the organization. So there's this element of active managing in your ethical leadership. And that is a key part of it, is talking about ethical standards or what you expect behavior-wise of your employees in the organization. And not only expectations, but then following up with reinforcing those positively and negatively. And those things really affect the culture that is built and perceived in the organization.
So when you mentioned the word culture, so let's talk about that in a bigger sense. I mean, as we know, culture is shaped by the individual, but not, to your point, not just a leader. It's shaped by every individual within the organization begins to form culture.
Right.
And when we think about this word, I think maybe just to kind of define as we talk about this for our listeners, and we talk about the word culture, let's frame it around the mindset of culture being which is a traditional definition, how we relate to emotions, how we handle conflict, how we connect with one another. What are our traditions? What do we celebrate? What do we not celebrate? How do we create organizational memory? All of these things that wrap up around culture. And you bring up a good point that there are a lot of organizations that think that as long as they have a great leader, they're going to have great culture. And that's also part of why we've come up with this topic, right? Because a lot of great leaders can be really good influencers, but they may not necessarily be good at building and shaping their culture within the organization, especially around the topics that this research hits, which is ethics and moral leadership. And I just want to qualify that, we're not getting into worldview questions, which determine ethics and morality. We're just simply saying that whatever that is, that it has to be flowing, it sounds like, from what you're saying in the research, and that it has to be very intentionally nurtured in an organization, not just having someone modeling it.
Yes. It really, and it needs to be more than just, written on a piece of paper or, in that training manual that you receive when you start your new position, but it's never spoken of after. Those expectations need to be communicated, enforced, and it really needs to be prioritized as part of your culture to say, hey, this is something that matters to us in the way that we do business. And as a result, it is going to be integrated in our, day to day. And from time to time, that means having ethical discussions, allowing other people to learn from a personal experience, as it comes up, inviting the team maybe to weigh in on that need for an ethical decision, or doing training, fostering professional development in the area of ethical leadership. It can be learned. It's not to assume that everybody starts in the same place with their decision making, but you can help build and reinforce processes to help people make good decisions. And then just making sure that, it is in the organization's culture from the top down, that those in leadership positions are fully bought in. They are role models for the rest of the employees and the company. And they are helping to carry that culture forward in their words and their behavior.
So let's talk about that at a deeper level. When you say leadership, and who, I guess I would say, we could even take that further. The question, who's modeling leadership, or whose leadership is being modeled? And as we see a lot, and especially, when I think about the nature of most listeners of our podcast are in, mid-size to smaller size nonprofit organizations, as opposed to some of our really large organizations that we work with. One of the things that we see a lot, which I believe carries out into what you're saying, is it's not just leadership at like an executive leadership team or an executive director, it's also the board.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. When you think of our nonprofit organizations, our board, they are, that formal body of leaders. It's also important to think about leadership is anyone who is influence. So you don't have to be in that formal position of authority to have leadership. And I think that's where a breakdown can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about if you would say to the average mid-sized nonprofit organization's board that you are shaping culture, I think we would probably get a lot of balking at that.
Mm-hmm.
But we see it, right? I mean, you see it in this research, we see it in practice, that they are shaping culture, and many times, which carries into the topic of what you're talking about on just what do we champion in an organization and what do we see as ethical or not ethical. But sometimes it's not what the board is proactively doing, it's what the board is unintentionally or intentionally not doing.
Right. Yeah. And so if we aren't actively managing ethics, somebody will, somebody that has
Hmm.
influence, like I said, in a position of authority or not. But if that standard isn't set, people make their own assumptions, right?
Right.
And when it's not enforced, that allows that to continue. It allows it to be repeated and it goes unchecked. Those kind of behaviors can spread. So that's why providing rewards and consequences and building that culture becomes really important. And especially with our nonprofit organizations, thinking about how much a nonprofit's reputation matters. And hopefully,
Right.
our leaders in executive positions, as well as the board of directors, knows that trust is the nonprofit currency. And once it's broken, it's very hard to restore. It's very precious. And we absolutely want to think about how we're caring for it as an asset of the organization.
Yeah. And to that point of trust, I mean, that carries out even to the benefactors, the beneficiaries, I should say, of the organization. If a board isn't showing gratitude towards their team, the staff and the organization, or if they're not showing up to board meetings, if they don't give, right, or if they don't
Right.
volunteer actively as advocates, the community sees that. And then I think what I hear you saying as well is that then gets determined as an ethical standard. And, what we mean by ethics, based on the framework of an organization and its culture, what does it champion as truth? What does it champion as right or wrong and as valuable? All of these things come around as ethics. And yeah, I mean, to your point, when the board is absent in those, they're actually redefining culture, or they're defining culture,
Yeah, yeah.
those inactions.
Absolutely. Yes. So having values and having good intentions, but not expressing those or, espousing them for other people.
Hmm.
If you aren't writing that narrative, somebody else will. So we want to make sure, and that is our leadership in ensuring that what we believe and how we want to be seen are one and the same because of the way that we are espousing or, carrying out those values and leading with integrity.
Yeah. So based on that, do you have any guidelines of, okay, we want to make sure that we know how to preserve at least some type of ethical standard and norm within our culture? And, I'm someone listening to this and I know that I have to nurture it from your expertise, from the research. Like, are there some simple things that I can do to begin to address that?
Yes. Yeah. So first I would say, have an open conversation with your team. Communicate about what your values are and don't assume that they already know or, assume that they're going to figure it out because we have good people in place. Communication, is key. And thinking about as a leader, how are you recognizing and rewarding integrity of your staff? So when you're seeing good decision making, do you acknowledge it? Do you enforce it positively in the behaviors
Hmm.
that you want to see carried out, maybe with your staff, with your board as well? Are we talking about and rewarding actions at the board level? And that is also on the flip side, holding people accountable when, even small things that, we don't, that don't align with our messaging. I'm just not allowing that to slide
Right.
and giving the message that it's acceptable. And, we see that's one of the main reasons why like a culture isn't strongly built is, you know, sometimes it's the busyness and or like the need to perform and achieve and get our things done, that we can make allowances to cut corners, or maybe not focus on a relationship as much as just getting the job done.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at accountability even in the small things, and making sure that our values are preserved and carried out in the day-to-day, in the small things. And then having again, going back to more of like that ethical dialogue, but so not just saying as a company, hey, we want to be ethical, these are our values, this is what we're going to do. But if an ethical situation comes up or there's concerns with your employees, being able to talk about that in a safe space is important to share as a leader in building that decision making and concern for your internal employees, as well as, again, that public trust, making sure that that's taken care of. So I think maybe sometimes we feel like we need to make ethical decisions by ourselves, or just maybe amongst a few. But I think bringing other people into that space and share with them why you perceive it as an ethical issue, and then the process you take to address it, is very important. Because if we don't first realizing we're dealing with an ethical issue, we don't address it as such. So just bringing more awareness to what we would consider, ethical or applicable to the culture that we want to create.
Yeah, I make the comment a lot that if I don't play golf, I can't be expected to play golf very well.
Right.
And I use that in light of, I think even to what you're saying, that if we're not socializing in our culture, how we are going to sense make through an issue using our own ethical framework, our core values, our core beliefs as an organization. And we wait for the golf game that someone wants us to play in, but we've not practiced or hardly at all played golf. It's going to be really difficult for us to do anything meaningful while we're out on a course. And I
Yes,
take away from what you're saying.
Analogy.
Yeah, that we need to start doing some role playing and open discussions so that when we're all called to be able to respond to something very significant, that our team, our leadership, our board, that we already have an understanding of what's the process that we're going to utilize to sense make and navigate what can be very volatile organizational situations.
Yes. And in addition to that, identifying your values up front, again, before you're called to play in that golf game, before
Right.
a crisis hits, that you already have firm footing on what your values are and what you're not willing to sacrifice, will help you make those decisions. So again, just being prepared and knowing what you value, and that will help carry you forward in your decision making. I think it have more clarity on at least what the problem and the decision needs to be. So
yeah, I think that's really good.
Yeah. And, like we're talking about a code of ethics, values are aligned with that. They're probably in that same binder that the ethical conduct is in. But again, they need to be talked about and amongst the staff, to be everybody on the same page, to say, these, as a company, these are the things that we value. And as such, we want to make sure that they are being carried out, in action and seen in that way. Because if they're not, then they're just written on that piece of paper in that binder somewhere. They don't carry the same weight.
So I think to wrap that up, define them. What are our values and ethics, and define expectations, identify what we reward and what we disincentivize. And I also hear you saying, think through what is our witness as an organization, and then to be able to socialize that understanding through role playing and open discussions, so that when we're really called to be game changers around these at a a high magnitude level, we're already there. But then also what I hear you saying is, in addition, because we're doing that, the things that are happening at a fabric level day in and day out start to become foundational as well.
Yes. Yes. Yep. We are, it is foundational. It is a social experience and learned behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be intentional. If these are things that we really deem that matter as an organization, that we are focusing on them, giving them the priority and some time, making time for them as we would for other things.
Yeah. So I think back to our title, Beyond Good Intentions. And what goes beyond good intentions is intentionality.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That we have to prioritize and be intentional in landing the plane in our culture. The Peter Drucker quote, which I like to use a lot, and that is culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a long time to build a healthy culture, but you can tear it down very fast.
Absolutely. We've all seen that happen.
Right.
In the newspapers, unfortunately. Yeah. And I think a lot of those companies would have not thought that they, had an ethics problem until they did.
Yeah. And to that point too, I think is a good definer. I tell people a lot that people can attack your character, but they can't attack your integrity. And similar to an organization, if we know what integrity is in our culture, people can attack the expression or the outward perceptions of that, but they can't attack the core of who we are if we know what we're standing by.
Yes.
And to your point, a lot of organizations don't have the clarity of what are they standing by.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is wonderful. And I think, the thing I want to highlight as a close is that idea of making sure that we're utilizing them, role playing, especially with the board and your leadership team, and having a sense of how do we even use the things that are important to us as an organization. Sarah, so appreciate your coming on again. This has been super helpful.
Good.
And we'll think of another topic and have you come back on.
All right. Sounds great. I look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the Levy & Associates Calibration Point Podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.